Hello, you two, and welcome back. In this week's topic, we're going to be looking at Florence Nightingale. So let's start off. Talk to your Teddy. Have a quick chat with your Teddy or an adult about what you think you already know about Florence Nightingale. Discuss a few ideas. These ideas could be what you think her job is, what you know about her family, anything that you think is relevant to Florence Nightingale. Pause the video here, have that discussion, and then come straight back. So, Florence Nightingale, here's what we need to know. Florence Nightingale is a very important, significant person in history, and this is because of all the help that she did during the Crimean War and how she contributed to the changes in nursing that have gone all the way through to today, and how she's made such an impact about hygiene. She's had a very different background and upbringing than Mary Seacole, but she did still help with the Crimean War in helping the soldiers. So let's have a look at her background. Florence was born in Italy in 1820, so that's 15 years after Mary Seacole. She was named after the city Florence, where she was born. This is where her parents went after they were married. She then grew up in Derbyshire, Hampshire, and London. You might recognise the word Hampshire. That's the same setting in which the Giraffe, the Pelly and Me was set for the Duke of Hampshire. And here's a picture here just next to me. Let me just move so you can have a look. This is the city of Florence. This is in Italy. This is where she was born. Her parents and family were white and very rich. They had 2 homes in Britain, and they had servants working for them in each home. Florence was very similar to Mary Seacole, as she knew exactly what she wanted to do when she grew up, and that was to be a nurse who would help people who needed the treatment and the care. She would practice these nursing techniques on her teddies, again, very similar to Mary Seacole. Florence and work. Florence wanted to be a nurse. She wanted to help those around her. Unlike Mary's mother, who was a caring woman for people with illnesses, who she learned all her techniques off, Florence's mother Frances and father William were very high up in social respect. This meant that they would attend the social gatherings like parties and meeting new people. And this is something that the Nightingale family did a lot of. And for a rich family, that was what people used to do. So as we know, this is currently set in the 1800s, so this is the Victorian era. Now, I call it the Victorian era because this is when Queen Victoria was reigning. She was our queen in Britain. So we know that that's why we call it the Victorian era. But the women in the Victorian era, they didn't have a lot of rights in what they could and couldn't do. This meant that certain jobs were done by men and certain jobs were done by women. And then this changed again when we think about social class. Now, thinking about social class, this was all about looking at whether a family was poor or whether a family was rich. And you would fit somewhere in between this scale of poor and rich, and that would be your social respect almost. So if a lady from the poor side of the scale, from a poor family, she may have to work and she may have to do labor such as being a maid or being like a nanny, which would look after other people's children. And they might have to do the cooking for other people, and they would almost have to be a servant. If you go further up the scale to the rich families that had a high social respect, that meant that they wouldn't be doing these things. They would have people do it for them. So that meant that Mary's mother, Frances, she would be a figure of people wanting to be her. She would keep the family name, and she would make sure that she would be bringing respect into the family, and she would be holding parties, and she'd be hosting, and she'd be doing lots of things that would make sure that the family is well known. We know that Florence didn't want to do this. Florence was a person who said, I don't like being the center of attention. I want to do something that helps people. I don't want to go to parties, and I don't want to sit around. I want to be someone who helps people. This therefore meant that Florence would be doing a job, which was, she wanted to do nursing, but she'd be doing a job that was labor work. So it would be work that required you to be on your hands and knees, working really hard. And because of the social class she was from, that was something that wasn't heard of. when you were born into a rich family, you would never go down the scale and choose to do jobs that were manual labor, the jobs that involved a lots of hard work, because you were born into a family and you were very lucky in the way that you didn't need to do that. You'd have other people that you would pay to do that for you. But Florence was different. She said, I didn't want to do that. I want to help people myself. So that's why she wanted to follow the profession of being a nurse. And that's what explains as being such a big shock for her parents, because Florence has decided that she doesn't want to keep that social level of respect. She wants to change that, and she wants to go and do a job that was done by people lower down. So Florence took a leap of faith. After ignoring her parents' wishes of not wanting her to become a nurse, she went into medicine training. She continued researching the role, and she refused to marry a man called Richard Milnes. And Richard Milnes was obviously another wealthy man, part of a family that had a lot of wealth. And the reason that they were so cross with her about not marrying this man was because it would have meant that she would have been marrying into more money, and it would have kept that social respect. She would have been higher up the social respect ladder, if you will. She would have been right at the end, so people would have looked at her and go, oh, I wish I was her. And that's what her parents wanted. But because she didn't want this, she refused to marry this man, because she would have been marrying into a life where she wasn't able to do nursing, and she didn't want that. She wanted to be a nurse. So this Richard Milnes was a very wealthy man in Britain, and she didn't want that. So what she did was she got on a boat in 1850, and she went straight to Germany, and she went to go train as a nurse. They had a special nursing school there, and she wanted to take part, and she wanted to train herself so that she could help people. Florence was a hit. After a few years of training, she returned back to London, and she got a job in a hospital in London. She impressed so many people, and she made it all the way up to superintendent, which is a position high up in a hospital where you're almost in charge of what the other nurses are doing there. She made it her mission to make hospitals safe by making them more hygienic. And this better hygiene was something that would save lives. During this time, hygiene wasn't something which would be carried out by hospitals. This is a time where we didn't understand germs. We didn't know what they were. There was somebody called Ignaz Semmelweis, who was a Hungarian physician, which meant he was a scientist working with people. And he demonstrated that by hand washing, he was able to save lives. He investigated doctors that worked as part of the maternity wards. They worked on the wards where women would go and have childbirth. They would deliver their baby. But the same doctors also worked as a forensic pathologist, which is someone who works with dead bodies. And their job would be, they would cut people open and they'd have a look inside, and they'd see how that person died. They'd get a better understanding of how someone died. Now, it's a very important job, that. But it was also important to make sure that that doctor was still the most qualified person to deliver a baby. So what would happen was Ignaz Semmelweis discovered that the doctors were going from cutting open a dead body and having a look, and without washing their hands, they would then go straight to the maternity ward and they'd deliver a baby. And these germs were still on the doctor's hands. And because the women were very weak when they were delivering babies, they were more susceptible, they were more likely to get a infection from the germs that were being carried on the doctor's hands from the dead body. And Ignaz Semmelweis, this Hungarian physician, found out that a lot of women were dying because they were getting infected after childbirth. Florence had heard about this, and she made it her mission to make sure that hospitals and all staff were washing their hands very well so that they could stop the germs from spreading from one ward to another. And this was really important because this is exactly what helped her in the Crimean War. Our task today, we're going to create our own hand washing guide. We need to think about as if we're Florence Nightingale, and we are letting everybody know how important it is to wash our hands and how to do it. Remember, we're in a time where people didn't know what germs are. You can't see them. So you're trying to convince people of something that they might not want to know. And this is, again, what makes somebody a significant person. They're changing history, even though it might be an idea that people don't agree with at the time. So Florence was changing history by saying you need to wash your hands because it's important that you don't let those germs go from one person to another. So we need to let people know how important it is to wash our hands. Now, there's two ways you can do this activity. The first way is you can create a poster showing a step-by-step guide on how to wash your hands. So to do this, you could use your time connectives, which is first, then, next, after that. And you would write each sentence fully out, explaining to me how to wash your hands properly. Or imagine you're Florence Nightingale and you're explaining to someone who's been in a hospital before, they work in a hospital, they're a nurse as well, but they've never ever known how to properly wash their hands. And they're carrying those germs from one person to another. You need to let them know how you can save people's lives by washing your hands properly. Or the second way is you get an adult to film you showing me washing your hands properly, showing me exactly how to do it. And what you do is you'd be talking to the camera, explaining what each move you're doing. So what you need to get first, what would you do to your hands first? Then what would you put on your hands? Then what would you do? And that's what I'm looking for in this task. If you can submit your work to Tapestry, I've been commenting on people's work already, so I'll be doing all the topic work. So if you've been adding to Tapestry, I've been making a note and been commenting back. So thank you very much to everyone that's been doing that. So this is your task for today. I look forward to seeing all your submissions on Tapestry, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much. Goodbye.